Wake up! Time to die. If you've been listening to this video series for any amount of time, you know I'm not a fan of licensed products in general. There are a few exceptions, but they break the licensing rules, which is a good thing. Too many licenses are incredibly restrictive. You can't go outside the established lore, even if the lore isn't enough to make an expansive world. Others shoehorn players into just a single role because they expect you to want to copy the hero's actions for the original story. Free League Publishing's Blade Runner has all of those problems and more. It's possibly the most restrictive RPG I've seen, and without expanding the game world, this is almost impossible to keep a campaign going. I'm Mr. Welch, and Blade Runner, Roy Batty's after you. Blade Runner, if he catches you, you're through. Blade Runner came out in 2022, written by Thomas Herenston and Joe LaFavi. Martin Grip was the lead artist, with Christian Granath and Gustav Ekelund providing graphic design and original art. The art style, like the Alien RPG, can be best described as blurry. Everything is slightly out of focus, like seen through a filter. It's a stylistic choice, but it's a nice one. The appearance is fine. It's on par with other Free League publishing titles. The contents are the problem. The game's entire concept is you're playing Blade Runners, hunting down illegal replicants in Los Angeles. That's the whole concept of the game. That one line. You can only build Blade Runners. There's no settings that are described outside of Los Angeles with any depth, and the very few mentioned get a single paragraph each. It even tells you in the opening line about travel outside Los Angeles, and that's outside the game's scope. You get some detail on how hard it is to qualify for off-world travel, but they don't tell you what the off-world colonies are like. It's using the Blade Runner 2049 timeline, so you can play humans or replicants, but you are Blade Runners. No other type of job is available. You can't even play a different type of cop. Everything is about replicants in this game. Ad nauseum. There's the rub. Philip K. Dick and Ridley Scott painted an expansive world that threw the cyberpunk culture at you. So many ideas, you felt like you just wanted to walk down the street to see what was there. This game is so zoomed in on a single aspect, it loses the point. Maybe a supplement could fix it, but the core problem remains. Single aspect RPGs are challenging to pull off because you need variety. And if the rules make diversifying your adventures hard, people will quickly grow bored of it. This is a significant problem with many military RPGs. You're soldiers. Every adventure is just go here and kill everyone. The only other cop RPG I've reviewed was Judge Dredd, but even that one lets you investigate different types of crimes. They didn't restrict you to just busting only muties, footsies, or fatties. For those who haven't seen the original movie, stop watching this video right now and go see it. There's 4 versions, each with subtle differences. I prefer the director's cut or the international version. That way you can avoid the annoying voiceover added by the studio execs post-production, or the Deckard was a replicant nonsense that destroys the entire point of the character and the film. In short, it's the future! The world is a polluted hellhole, and people have invented realistic androids called replicants that are forbidden from going to Earth. If they do that, they're hunted down by a special police force called Blade Runners, trained to detect and kill them. The first one is a classic, and if the Oscars didn't have such a stick up their ass about science fiction movies, then Rutger Hauer would have been the only guy nominated for Best Supporting Actor. This guy made you well up in the famous Tears in the Rain speech, and he was the bad guy. Don't worry too much about the sequel. It's very pretty. But like most of Villeneuve's movies, it becomes a slog. Even his action scenes are slow. Blade Runner is all about the setting. It's always dark. It's always raining. It doesn't matter if you're indoors, everything is poorly lit and probably damp. Outside, the only lights seem to be made of neon. There's smoke everywhere. Somewhere, hiding in the darkness, there's a saxophonist. The only legal architectural style is Art Nouveau. The sun never seems to rise, and when it does, it's almost blanked out by the smog that covers the skies. The city is omnipresent, and it's oppressive. All the animals are dead. All the plants are dead. Everything but the people are dead. And there are people everywhere, and their fashions could make people watching an Olympic sport. At least they could if the Olympics weren't dead too. The base mechanics require you to roll a 6 on any dice you roll to get a success, with different die types representing different levels of ability. The worst level is a D6, meaning you only have a 16% chance of success, while a D12, the highest, gives you better than a 50% chance of success. They break this down by level from A to D, where A is a D12 and D is a D6. They could have just used the number of the die as the explanation to save some space. If you roll a 10 or higher, it counts as 2 successes. That's the mechanics of the RPG. Not challenging to grasp at all. The stress roll is back, which gives you a reroll at the expense of a stress point. Stress makes things more challenging in the long run, especially if they equal your resolve, which is more like your mental hit points. Before I continue, let me say this book has a lot of wasted space. Multiple pages with a single paragraph, with the rest of the page, or sometimes 2 pages, just a piece of art. I know this looks great for style points, but you could have skimmed 20 pages from this book easily by condensing some of these pages down. especially since the one paragraph on all these pages is almost always fluff. It screams padding in a game where the subject matter is already heavily restricted in volume. There's an extensive selection of gear. Well, extensive in the sense that if it was in the movie, it's in the game. Despite the game's heavy focus on combat, there's a total of 8 guns available, with a similar amount of melee weapons. This isn't the free-fire utopia of cyberpunk. You've got a variety of spinners or flying cars, with ground vehicles getting a brief mention when necessary. There's not much else to buy in the game, as everything is provided for you by the LAPD. It even tells you to just wing purchases outside the game's scope, as if it's not critical to hunting down replicants, you don't need it. Everything else is just sorted into a hand-waved rarity chart. The scope of every adventure in Blade Runner is an investigation. This is where you're going to start to hit problems. The core behind the movies was a single cop with an investigation. Deckard didn't have a partner, he did it all by himself. Kay was similar, though he had more access to the police department's goods. This is a party of Blade Runners, all working the same case. When was the last time you saw a cop show with more than 2 cops working on the case? Yes, you can have people working on a particular aspect of the case, but then you've got players with a lot of downtime until you get to the part where they get involved in the adventure. The other option is you've got 4 to 6 players standing around a crime scene or similar, all making the same role repeatedly. A typical adventure is you get your case, track down the replicant, and retire it. The game repeats itself quite a bit. Every mission is effectively the same thing. You're chasing down skin jobs. That's your only job because you can only play Blade Runners. The rules don't allow you to play anything else. It's the most restrictive game I've seen since Aliens, where you only had Colonial Marines. And it suffers from all the same problems. Except the rules aren't a train wreck like leading-edge games. Yes, they're pretty simplistic, but they aren't punitive. Unlike the other FLP game I've reviewed in Alien, players have no options to explore the game world. It also has the annoying habit of replacing words with symbols, so you'll buy the special dice that I hate. Ones are unicorns, and every number 6 or higher is an eyeball. So why don't we just use those symbols instead of saying success or failure? They want you to buy their special dice instead of rolling regular dice and remembering a 6 or higher is a success and a 10 or higher is 2 successes. I'm not a fan of replacing numbers with symbols on a simple equal or higher roll. Is Blade Runner a good game? No, far from it. It's plagued with all the issues that licensed products have, and it doubles down on those issues. Yes, it quotes from the first movie quite extensively, which can be expected, but there's no stats for any of those characters. There's little in the way of stats for anybody at all. The game tells you to make it about discovering yourself in every adventure, but soul-searching in an RPG only goes so far. Eventually you're beating a dead horse with that concept, and the players will eventually want to do something, anything else. You can't restrict the players to a single option in a game, especially when the available option isn't viable for more than 1 or 2 players. Imagine playing a military game where everybody's required to be artillery, or a space opera, and nobody can take a job out of the engineering section. This game is going to get very boring very quickly, without exception. That's the biggest problem with licensed games. They're restricted in what they can do by the license. The outstanding licensed games are few and far between. Star Wars got express permission to expand on the universe from Lucasfilms. TSR and Marvel, on the Marvel Superheroes game, were in such a symbiotic relationship that ideas from the other companies started bleeding into either the comic or the game. But those are the exceptions to the rules. All too often, you're not allowed to use your imagination. What you saw on the screen, read in the book, or saw in the video game is all you're allowed to mention. And if that source material is inadequate, the game will suffer badly. Worse, the license holder can demand you add extra bits to your line or require you to get a new license to add related properties. Just ask Decipher about Star Trek or Alderac about Stargate. People don't want to just relive the scenes that got them into the setting. They want to expand the world's lore. They want new stories that grow on the background in the world building, not just rehashes of things they've already seen. You might have players that want to take on the part of Deckard for a while, but others might want to see what it's like to play Roy or Pris. Or you could have the masochists that want to recreate Kurt Russell's character in Soldier, which was at least more exciting despite its flaws than Blade Runner 2049, despite Kurt Russell barely speaking 100 words at all in that entire movie. But people will want to see what else the universe has. What's the rest of the game like? Please take me to Tannhauser's Gate, the Shoulder of Orion, other cities, other countries. It would be hilarious if the rest of the nation was fine and the hellhole setting was just Los Angeles. Aside from the dice issue mentioned earlier, the mechanics are fine, as while a lousy system can hurt a game, it can otherwise ruin a licensed product, either because the system is just too basic because it's a rush job like you got with White Dwarf, or they try to get cute with tying the mechanics to the setting like Serenity. Blade Runner makes a huge deal with the stress rules, but that can't be a significant aspect of every single adventure, because the police will start to get numb to the horrors of the job. This game would be much improved if it offered crossover opportunities. I had a player create a Roy-class synthetic for the Alien RPG with rather scary effectiveness. Watching peak physical form Roy Batty manhandle a xenomorph while spouting philosophical observations was a thing of beauty. Plus, it gave us a look at what the replicant was doing off-world. Blade Runner is far too narrow of a focus to show us the rest of the world. Get your case, retire the skin job, take a break. Repeat until you all decide to quit and go play Street Fighter. This is probably because of the license. Good chance they weren't allowed to build on the milieu. All they had is what they saw. Alright, enough beating on this one. It has all the flaws of a licensed product, and I don't even think expansions could save Blade Runner. You will quickly get bored of the ridiculously narrow scope. So next up is another licensed product. This time G.I. Joe by Renegade Game Studios. Are we looking at another licensed rant, or will this one show some initiative? Until next time, James Hong was born in 1929. Blade Runner came out in the early 80s, and they decided to make him look 80 for some reason. Not just this movie, he's got to be pushing 100 in this scene. And just a few scenes later, they've got his age at 10,000. Don't get me wrong, the man's a national treasure. But that's just a rather weird typecasting to get into. It's like he hit the 1980s and Hollywood decided he needed to be at least 30 years older for every role. And you can hear the doctors in the hospital back in 1929 going, "Congratulations, Mrs. Hong. You've given birth to a bouncing baby octogenarian."